Hello, today is Monday, July 25th, 2022. I'm Joe Schmidt from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. Over the last couple of weeks, two high-profile investigations have highlighted the enormous financial and legal risks created by lax management of employees' text messages, apps, and personal mobile devices in the workplace. Why should you care? Well, these events and this podcast are going to make you think twice about your company's use of mobile services, especially your BYOD policies. I'm fortunate to be joined by my buddy Kevin DiLallo, a senior partner at LB3, and the guy that connected the dots between these two investigations. Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Joe, it's good to be back.
Okay, so tell us about these investigations.
Well, Joe, there are two separate but substantively similar sets of facts here, one in the private sector and one in the public sector. They're noteworthy because of the high profiles of the organizations involved. First, there was the announcement that the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, had completed a months-long probe of several Wall Street banks, which resulted in fines totaling, wait for it, $1 billion. What could possibly be so serious, you might ask? Well, actually, it's something as boring as record keeping. But in this case, there were systemic violations of fundamental laws and regulations for investment advisors and other financial institutions that date all the way back to the 1930s and 40s. The SEC and CFTC found widespread noncompliance at all levels within the organizations, stemming from employees' routine use of personal mobile devices, email accounts, and text messaging apps for regulated financial transactions and related communications. Because the targeted institutions failed to maintain records of these communications and transactions, as the law requires, the two federal agencies slapped historic fines on them to set an example and demonstrate the importance of keeping certain business records. They weren't messing around.
Holy smokes, Kevin, $1 billion. That's a lot of money. So what about the second investigation?
Well, more recently, the U.S. House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol learned that the U.S. Secret Service purged critical text messages that agents sent and received while protecting the president, the White House, and Congress on January 5th and 6th. And the text message purge apparently occurred after the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General requested those messages. The Secret Service's explanation for destroying critical evidence was that the messages were deleted as part of a routine tech refresh that had been in the works for months. Now, I'm not taking a position on the veracity of that explanation or the wisdom and timing of the tech refresh, but one thing is clear from both the Secret Service texting debacle and the bank's regulatory lapses. In both cases, there apparently were no effective workplace policies in place to ensure that important organizational communications were preserved for record-keeping purposes and not commingled with personal data. If the policies were in place, they weren't being enforced.
Okay, so clearly some bad or at least hugely careless actors not doing their jobs. So what's the takeaway here?
Joe, there are several lessons that come out of these unfortunate revelations. First, as we've been saying for years, a bring your own device or BYOD policy can be a bit of a Trojan horse. The modest savings an organization might realize by shifting mobile costs to its employees is more than offset by the potential legal and financial risks of giving up control over employees' use of mobile communications to transact business.
Yeah, BYOD seems to be one of those things that companies think they need to show workers that they offer some flexibility in what devices they can use and how they do their work. But it might not be such a good idea if it puts the company, and I suppose also in some cases, the individual at risk.
You're right. By removing or diminishing oversight and control over mobile communications used to conduct business, an enterprise is tempting fate. For example, what happens when a disgruntled employee leaves the company with their personal device and all the data on it? What happens if an employee who has access to corporate computing systems from their personal device downloads an app that contains spyware, which works its way into your corporate network? And how does a regulated business or a governmental entity honor its obligations to maintain records in the ordinary course of business when employees are using their own devices to communicate with vendors, customers, and business partners? Here's how. An organization whose employees use text messaging or other mobile apps to conduct business must have effective automated procedures in place to regularly archive and then retain all material electronic records for compliance, accounting, regulatory, and other reasons. The challenge is that employees who use their own personal devices for business will almost surely resist automatic archiving of their text messages, even though there are a number of solutions available in the market, because of the risk that their personal communications will also be preserved for posterity.
So, Kevin, I'm sitting here scratching my head, wondering how this happens. Gosh, I mean, there are plenty of applications and procedures to address these issues, and it's rather surprising that such high levels of business and government that these relatively simple and, affordable measures haven't been implemented.
Joe, we all know that in the modern world, employees need to use mobile devices and services to work efficiently, but they shouldn't use the same device for both personal and business use. All electronic business communications, regardless of the device on which they originate, should be retained for at least 1 year in a manner that prohibits alteration or destruction. Any employee who is permitted to access enterprise data, including email, from a mobile device should be required to use a device that's controlled by the enterprise IT department and that can be wiped clean, updated, scanned for malware, and so forth by the organization at any time. Furthermore, a mobile device management or MDM solution should be installed to ensure that each employee with a company-issued device isn't using that device for unauthorized purposes, such as copyright infringement, personal social media interactions, or harassment. And enterprises should prohibit employees from downloading any unvetted, unauthorized apps, and they should enforce the prohibition through the MDM solution.
So, Kevin, what should companies do? I mean, mobile is just so important to enterprises. They can't just take it away from everyone.
No, they can't do that, but they can and should be more attentive. As a condition of receiving an enterprise subsidized mobile device, each employee should be required to agree in writing to the enterprise's terms and conditions of mobile use. Those terms and conditions should address information security, good citizenship, for example, silencing your ringer in meetings, risk avoidance, like not using the device while driving, and cost control, for example, using Wi-Fi whenever that's available. Every enterprise should consistently enforce its policies to send employees a clear message that it takes those policies seriously. Laissez-faire management of mobile devices can have real consequences, as recent developments remind us. Don't take it from me, the SEC itself released almost exactly the same guidance in December 2018, and it holds true today as much as it did then, maybe more so.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Now, I really do appreciate you bringing this to our attention and providing those useful tips for controlling the risks that misuse of mobile services do pose to companies. If you'd like to learn more about this, Kevin's written a great paper that's available on our websites. You can also contact Kevin, me, or any of our LB3 and TC2 colleagues if you want to talk about your company's mobile needs. And then finally, you can stay up to date by subscribing to these podcasts, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.